The air bit at my face, sharp and unforgiving, each breath puffed out, a white cloud disappearing into the night. My street stretched before me, lit by flickering streetlights that cast long, dancing shadows. It was the kind of night that sent shivers down your spine, the kind that made you want to be curled up inside, far away from the biting cold. I hugged my coat tighter around me, my footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. The houses stood silent, dark windows staring back at me like vacant eyes. A lone dog barked in the distance, the sound sharp and lonely in the stillness. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, heavy and absolute. The streetlight at the corner flickered, plunging the sidewalk ahead into momentary darkness. As the light flickered back to life, I saw him. A figure standing at the edge of the light's reach, shrouded in shadow. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the distance between us a chasm of cold air and unspoken fear. Then slowly, he began to walk towards me. Each step he took seemed to echo in the silence, amplified in the stillness. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, fingers closing around my keys. A useless weapon perhaps, but it gave me a flicker of comfort in that moment of mounting fear. As he drew closer, I could make out more details. He was tall, about my height, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his coat. His head was down, face hidden in shadow. But there was something about the way he moved, a familiar tilt to his shoulders, a certain heaviness in his gait that sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't place it, this feeling of unease that was quickly blossoming into full-blown panic. It was like seeing a ghost, a phantom, from the corner of your eye. Your mind knew it wasn't real, but your heart hammered against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. He was close now, close enough that I could see his face. And that's when the world seemed to tilt on its axis, the ground shifting beneath my feet, because the face staring back at me wasn't that of a stranger, it was my own. Every detail, every line, every imperfection mirrored back at me. The same tired eyes, the same day-old stubble, the same faint scar above my left eyebrow. It was like looking into a mirror, but this mirror breathed and walked and stared back with an intensity that sent chills racing down my spine. My mind, desperate for an explanation, scrambled for possibilities. A trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by the cold. But deep down I knew the truth. This was no trick, no figment of my imagination. This was real, terrifyingly real. Fear turned my legs to lead. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there, frozen in the face of my own reflection-given flesh. But my body refused to obey, rooted to the spot as if gravity itself had intensified tenfold. He stopped just a few feet away from me, our faces inches apart. I could feel his breath on my skin, cold and sharp like the night air. And in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own fear, mirrored back at me with an intensity that stole my breath. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. It was the silence of two souls colliding in the vast emptiness of the night, a silence pregnant with unspoken questions and a fear that ran deeper than any words could express. His eyes searched mine, and I could see the same confusion, the same terror reflected back at me. It was as if he, too, was struggling to comprehend the impossible, to reconcile the reality of our existence with the fundamental laws of the universe that dictated such a thing should not be. And in that moment of shared terror, a flicker of something else passed between us. Recognition. It was subtle, fleeting, but it was there nonetheless. A spark of understanding that transcended the fear, a silent acknowledgement that we were both trapped in this bizarre, unsettling reality. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to hang in the air between us. And the word that escaped his lips, the word that shattered the silence, was my own name. Hearing my name spoken by another, by myself, sent a fresh wave of terror crashing over me. It was a violation, an intrusion, a shattering of the very foundation of my identity. My name, once a source of comfort and familiarity, now felt alien and strange, twisted into a mockery by the being standing before me. He took a step closer, and I instinctively flinched back, my hand raising as if to ward off a blow. But he made no move to touch me. He simply stood there, his eyes searching mine with a desperate intensity that both terrified and compelled me. How? The word escaped my lips, a choked whisper that seemed to hang in the freezing air. It was the only question I could manage, the only one that mattered in that moment of surreal terror. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of helplessness and despair. His voice, when he spoke, was a hollow echo of my own. I don't know. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, two sides of the same coin, two reflections in a shattered mirror. The silence pressed in on us, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of our ragged breaths and the distant, lonely howl of a dog. I studied him, searching for any difference, any detail that would set us apart. But there was nothing. He was a perfect replica, down to the smallest imperfection. The same way my hair fell across my forehead, the same nervous habit of biting my lip when I was anxious, the same worn leather strap on my wristwatch. It was both fascinating and repulsive, this glimpse into a world where the impossible had become reality. A world where the boundaries of identity had blurred, where the very concept of self was called into question. And as I stared at him, at myself, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. If he was me, then who was I? The question hung between us, unspoken but ever present. It was a question that threatened to unravel the very fabric of my being, to cast me adrift in a sea of uncertainty and existential dread. What do we do? My voice was a trembling whisper, barely audible above the wind that whipped through the empty street. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and understanding. It was the look of a fellow traveler, someone who had stumbled upon the same uncharted territory, who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "I don't know," he said, his voice a hollow echo of my own despair, "but I think we need to find out." We stood there for a long moment, two halves of a whole, united by fear and a shared sense of the uncanny. The wind whipped around us, biting through our clothes, but neither of us moved. We were locked in a silent standoff, a battle not of flesh and bone, but of identity and existence. "Where did you come from?" My voice, when I finally spoke, was hoarse and uncertain. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "I don't remember. It's like waking from a dream, only—" He trailed off, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. "Only it's not a dream." The certainty in his voice, a mirror of the growing dread in my own heart, sent a shiver down my spine. This was no nightmare, no figment of a tired mind. This was real, terrifyingly real, and we were trapped in it together. A strange sensation washed over me, a mixture of fear and acceptance. As if on some primal level I had always known this moment was coming, as if the universe had been conspiring to bring us face to face, two sides of the same coin destined to meet. He took a step toward me, and this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I found myself mirroring his movement, closing the distance between us until we were standing almost nose to nose. Our eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. The fear, though still present, was tempered by a strange sense of camaraderie. We were in this together, two sides of the same terrifying, exhilarating coin. What are we? The question, whispered into the cold night air, hung between us, heavy with unspoken implications. But there was no answer, not yet. Only the shared weight of our existence, a burden we would have to carry together. The wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves around our feet. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like living things. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. I looked at him, at myself, and for the first time since that initial jolt of terror, I saw not a monster, but a reflection. A flawed, imperfect reflection, but a reflection nonetheless. And in that reflection, I saw a flicker of hope. Maybe we weren't so different, he and I. Maybe beneath the surface, beneath the fear and confusion, there was a shared humanity that transcended the bizarre circumstances of our meeting. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice stronger now, infused with a newfound determination. "Together." He nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. And in that shared smile, in that silent acknowledgement of our shared predicament, I felt a connection form. A connection forged not in blood or kinship, but in the crucible of a shared terror, a shared existence. We turned then together and walked into the night. The wind whipped at our backs, urging us forward, and the streetlights cast our shadows long and intertwined. We didn't know what the future held, what answers awaited us in the darkness, but we would face them together, two halves of a whole, forever bound by the chilling encounter that had shattered our world and remade it anew.